Hello everyone, this is Grey Minahem and welcome to the showcase video of the entries for the Tiny Fighter Tournament. Let's start with the Angery Birb by Tyrannus, which is his 4K entry, and it sports 8 tiny heat missiles and is one of the very few craft that use a boom and zoom tactic, although it can only reach 78 meters per second. It also is the only craft that's using shields. Next up is the Canistor, Tyrannus' 5K entry. We spawn 2 of these and they are rather slow at only 70 meters per second. But they are probably going to be the king of alpha damage in this tournament. They use a 500mm timed HE frag cannon, over 9 meter shell length, direct input feed, but almost 16 seconds of cooldown. They are surprisingly maneuverable, and I have to say I'm pretty scared of what they are going to do. Next is the CTF-free Calico by Eigenfunction. It is his 4.5k entry and it uses his famous loaf and lure combination, and it is quite fast at 143 meters per second and uses a tiny autocannon. Next is his 5k entry, the CTF for Sphinx, which is even faster at 153 meters per second, using probably the same AI setup and sporting a particle cannon which does impact damage. Next is the slightly phallic Dick and Joke entry by the Jimmer, which uses tiny HE missiles, and at 158 meters per second it's the fastest entry of the whole bunch. Next is one of my favorites, the Dragonfly by Eternal Doom, which uses a pack cannon. For propulsion it uses a lot of wings mounted on spin blocks, and it moves forward using a flapping motion and it looks absolutely beautiful. I'm really looking forward to seeing this thing maneuver. Up next is the Drunken Gnat by the King of Dust. Another pack vehicle, also kind of fast at 124 meters per second, and it also uses a complete lure AI, so I have no idea what it's doing, but it looks kind of fancy, pretty sleek, and yes, I'm looking forward to it. Next is the completely meme entry called Hellish Suffering and Despair by Captain Iron Lad. It does have a large missile, but it only uses that for propulsion, and its only weapons are two 60mm autocannons fixed to the hull under the belly. I don't think it's gonna do very well in the tournament, but it looks amazing, and it definitely gets points for creativity. Now for the first team with different vehicles, we have Eigenfunction's 4K entry with the Hugbot Mark 1 and the Sneezebot Mark 1. The Hugbot, as you can see here, uses a few pistons and tries to ram the enemy with an ammo crate, which is a thing, apparently. And his Sneezebot uses a tiny cram cannon with a bit of HE, and I'm curious how it's gonna do because it's definitely one of the more meme entries. And next are the Mosquito Drones by Eternal Doom, and those are 4 drones. They are built very similar, but they do have different warheads. and we get 4 of those. So anyone who's trained against all the testing dummies is probably gonna have a bit of an easier time against those, but we will see. Up next is the Oculus by Tyrannus, which is his 4.5k entry, and it has a huge particle cannon which does amazing damage. It is the biggest particle cannon out of all the other entries, and it's decorated accordingly. Next up is my entry, the Rocinante. It is the only laser craft in this tournament and mostly consists of decorations. It's also pretty fast at 145 meters per second. Up next are the Slaughterfish by Dragon. Those are 3 very beautiful craft using really big cram cannons. I don't know if here you can see quite the explosive damage, and they fire at only 90 meter range, so they are basically a close combat shotgun. Next is the Darth Oogway by Pendalos. It is his 5k entry and one of the very few entries that use heavy armor. It is almost entirely made out of heavy armor with just those rubber tips at the front. And it uses lure, as we probably all expected, and a explosive pack cannon. And next is his Kuzushi, which is his 4.5k entry, and it uses a tiny APS cannon, and compared to the Darth Oogway, which is rather slow at 107 meters per second, this one at 109 meters per second is a tiny bit faster but much more maneuverable. Next are the Chaser and Failure by Scriddles McGee. One of them has a good pack cannon and the other has no weapons at all and is solely there to mess up with people that forgot to set up a target prioritization. It uses a jet engine on a spin block on a turret, and it's gonna do very fancy jiggly maneuvers, and it's gonna be almost impossible to hit, although it sometimes decides to launch itself into space or in the ocean. Next, also from Scribbles McGee, is the Nibbler, his 5k entry, which uses a huge thrust jet on the back, which is also mounted on a turret on a spin block, and it's doing very similar fancy maneuvers, but it also sometimes crashes into people, so we will see how that plays out. Now for the 5k entry of Eternal Doom, we have the Tumblebee, which uses a heat frag tiny APS with a pretty high rate of fire, and it's a very tanky craft, and at 64 meters per second, the slowest craft after the Hellish Suffering and Despair, but that kind of doesn't count as it's just propelled by a missile. It's also really maneuverable as it's using all 4 jet engines mounted on spin blocks. And the last entry are the Ur and Uruk by Siften. I have no idea how to pronounce the name, I'm sorry. It's a 5k entry using APS, one 20mm rapid fire gun, and one 200mm slow firing gun, and they are a good team and I'm really looking forward to them. I also really like how he decorated those kinda cockpits. So yes, that is about it for the entries. I am now going to start recording the first fights, and I hope everyone is going to enjoy it.